Conservative Voices Silenced. I'm Christine Sposato, and I'm excited to be your guide through the stories that matter. Stories of resilience, strength, and triumph in a world that doesn't always make space for conservative voices.
And I'm Elizabeth Smith, joining Christine in this journey. We know how it feels when your beliefs seem to be drowned out by the noise, but here on this podcast, we're turning up the volume.
That's right, Elizabeth, and we're creating a space where conservative voices can speak their truths, sharing the challenges they've faced and the victories they've celebrated.
Conservative Voices Silenced is not just a podcast, it's a movement that recognizes the diversity within conservatism and gives a platform to those who felt marginalized.
So whether you're a conservative looking for reliable stories or someone curious about the experiences of those with differing viewpoints, you're in the right place.
Get ready for an engaging ride as we dive into the trials and triumphs of conservatives navigating a progressive world. We invite you to join us on this journey of discovery, understanding, and most importantly, amplifying voices that deserve to be heard.
This is Conservative Voices Silenced, where silence ends and the conversation begins. Hi, and welcome to Conservative Voices Silenced. I'm Christine Sposato.
And I'm Elizabeth Smith. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome. I need to start out by asking Elizabeth about her mug.
Oh, yes, because I forgot to mention it the last time. So Moms for Liberty, we do what's called Elfster. It's an Elfster app, and you can do, like, we did Secret Santa, and then we did Secret Valentine. So my Secret Valentine, who, by the way, I still don't know who you are, so thank you if you're watching this. I absolutely freaking love this cup. You have no idea how excited I was when I opened it. It says, in case you can't read it, it says, "Be careful or you'll end up in my podcast." And I love it. Thank you so much, whoever you were. And I love everything else that was in the box, but I'm so overjoyed about this cup.
I love the cup too. That is fantastic. I do love it. So you've been having some weather, and in today's episode, you're going to disappear for a while, but you didn't blow away, Dorothy.
No, I'm still here.
So we're recording this intro after we recorded the interview. So we could just say that, give you a little heads up that Elizabeth is going to disappear, but here she is. She's still fine.
I am still here. We have lots of wind today, and we had storms all night long and rain and possible storms in a little bit. And then it'll turn to ice and then snow tonight overnight. So that'll be fun. But, it's still going to be March. So we have a whole nother month of who knows what's going to happen weather.
I know. Well, today we have Gregory Brown, who is a professor and an activist. And we're really thrilled to have him on. He doesn't call himself a feminist, but I will. He really fights for women's rights. He's a professor of, anatomy, physiology. He's a science professor, kinesiology. And he will tell us a little bit more about his activism, but he has been asked to testify in various cases around the country that are testing legally whether trans women can compete on women's sports teams. So he's going to talk a bit more about that. But Elizabeth, can you talk about Title IX a little bit and let us know a little more of the history of it?
Yes. So all I really have is the version that's on Wikipedia, but I just wanted to make sure that our listeners knew what's going on when he starts mentioning some of these things in there, because if you really have never heard of it or anything like that, you may not know what it is. So according to Wikipedia, Title IX is the most commonly used name for the landmark federal civil rights law in the United States that was enacted as part of the Education Amendments of 1972. It prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school or any other education program that receives funding from the federal government. So he's going to mention that quite a bit, and that's part of what he's doing, is he's trying to defend women in sports.
And I'm old enough, I was alive in 1972, um, and old enough to remember when all of this came into our public schools and the difference it made in the lives of girls, and it changed, kind of the social dynamic and the social fabric of high schools and well, I was, junior high, and it started really kind of shifting to, I would say, in my memory, was it empowered girls. Girls could,
Mhm.
walk down the hall with kind of a different sort of a different power, empowerment, I guess. Because they could compete and they were athletes. So it was important. And we're also going to talk about campus climate, what is going on in higher education today. Uh, we didn't even scratch the surface of what Greg has to share and offer. He's great.
Mhm.
Also, he is speaking for himself as just a private citizen. He's not representing any college, university, campus. He's not giving the campus policies or anything. This is just his observations and opinions, just as a person who's been on campus. So I respect and appreciate that a lot. Uh,
Yeah.
Greg is going to talk about DEI. And for those of you who don't know, just a quick definition of DEI. D is diversity, E is equity, and I stands for inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when we talk about the woke wave, when we talk about the progressive culture that has taken over higher education, these three are the pillars. These are,
Mhm.
the three-legged stool. This is what it's all based on, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what diversity means is it refers to all aspects of human difference, social identities, social group differences, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, creed, color, sex, gender identity, sexual identity, socioeconomic status, language, culture, national origin, religion, spirituality, age, ability and disability, military veteran status, political perspective, and associational preferences. It sounds very broad and it sounds like it covers a lot, but in actuality, what happens is when it's really rolled out on campus, there are a handful of these identities within diversity that are preferred over others. And that's very clear. And that's the campus culture that we're going to talk about in the show. Equity refers to fair and just practices and policies that ensures all campus community members can thrive. Equity is different than equality. Okay, so this is really important,
Mhm.
in that equality implies treating everyone as if their experiences are exactly the same. Being equitable means acknowledging and addressing structural inequalities, historic and current, that advantage some and disadvantage others. Equal treatment results in equity only if everyone starts with equal access to opportunities. I don't have the illustration here, but the illustration that's often used is um, three kids trying to look over a fence. The three kids are different heights. If you were equally trying to help them, you would give each of them a stool that's 2 feet high. Each of them get a 2 foot stool. So each of the kids stand on the 2 foot stool. Some of them still can't see over the fence because they're shorter.
Mhm.
So what equity is you measure the kid and you give them a stool, each of them a stool of different heights. So once they get to the top of the fence, they're all the same, like, height. They can all see over the fence in the exact same way. So that's typically how it's illustrated or described.
Mm-hmm.
Inclusion refers to a campus community where all members are and feel respected, have a sense of belonging, are able to participate and achieve to their potential. While diversity is essential, it's not sufficient. An institution can be both diverse and non inclusive at the same time, and thus, a sustained practice of creating inclusive environments is necessary for success. Well, these are all lovely words. Truly, they are. And the concept, really, um, it's valuable and commendable. In practice, if a white student walked into a DEI office on campus, they would be unwelcome.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the words say that all students are supported, they're not.
They're not.
It's a very uncomfortable situation. And so I I am an advocate for fairness, merit, and equality. And fairness is embracing principles of fairness. Institutions strive to create an environment where all students are treated with impartiality. It engages learners to strive for excellence and the quality of education. So nobody gets special treatment. And equality in higher education provides opportunities to all students, regardless of their circumstance, status, or background. So I don't know if you can see the contrast, but I am advocating and working for the culture in higher education to swing back to fairness, merit, and equality.
Yep.
So about that.
And you got to figure DEI is not just school wide either. That's also in businesses. It's very big in businesses. And I'm sure many of you have seen the airlines that hire now off of DEI. So while you may get somebody who is putting that plane together, making those parts, who was strictly hired only based off of the color of their skin, not based off of where did they place when they graduated college? Were they the bottom of their class? Did they almost fail out? Well, the color of their skin still gets them that job. So DEI may sound good on the surface, but when your life depends on somebody knowing their stuff, and that's not why they were hired at all, that's a little scary for me.
And it's scary for all of us because the message to me is like inverse of what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
The message is if you are brown or black or underrepresented or one of those terms that they use, you actually can. To me, it communicates, well, actually, you're not smart enough, not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
When that is absolutely not true. Yes, depending culturally on where we come from, there are differences, but we can make up for those differences. And yes, there are some accommodations that can be made, sure, but you're smart enough. You can do it on your own. You don't need somebody to pave your way for you to get a job if you're not really trained for that job. You're smart. You can train for the job.
Yeah.
So,
yep. And your work ethic. Work ethics will get you where you need to go. If you have strong work ethics, you'll get there. You will. And to have it, handed to you because you're a woman or because of the color of your skin or, anything like that, you didn't earn it. And everybody should want to feel that they earned what they have. So that's my 2 cents.
those are good 2 cents, Elizabeth.
Thank you. I'll be back next week with 2 more.
Yeah. All right. Young Gregory. And
yep.
He is, again, college professor, PhD, doing great work in the community on his campus. He's going to do a little intro of his own. So let's bring on Greg.
All right.
Well, good morning. And here we are with Greg Brown. We're happy to have him here with us today. Um, Greg, I'd like to start out this morning with you sharing with us some of your accomplishments, what you've done in your career. And I think that sets a great stage and gives context for the other conversations we're going to have this morning.
All right. Well, thanks, Christine. I'll try not to brag about myself too much here, but my dad always said it's not bragging if it's true, right?
That's right.
So I'm a professor at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. I need to say that what I say here is my own opinions. I'm not a spokesman for the university.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you.
so, yeah, boy, it's hard to say what the accomplishments are, but I've published 57 peer-reviewed papers where I'm either the author or co-author. I've had 75 presentations at national or international conferences where I'm either the presenter or co-presenter. And these have all primarily been in the realm of exercise science, primarily exercise physiology and sports nutrition. I've had a few papers that have been on teaching methods, but mostly it's been stuff like nutritional supplements or aerobic and anaerobic training or combined resistance and endurance training. Lately, my area of research has really been looking at sex-based differences in athletic performance, particularly in children. And where this is tied in is I'm currently serving as an expert witness in 6 or 8 cases, legal cases, where states are defending their laws stating that you must be female to participate in female sports, or in cases where a coach or someone has stepped up and said, no, we're not going to allow males to be on our female sports team. And so that's just kind of a brief rundown of some of the things that I've done and what I'm doing.
That's great. And that's very helpful for us to know the context that you come to these statements that you can make about biology. And your areas that you teach are physiology, sports.
Yeah, so my main class is exercise physiology at both the graduate and undergraduate level, which it's both about, adapting to exercise and of course then leading into sports performance. So looking at really it's biology, biological factors that influence sports performance. I've also taught sports nutrition. I've taught introductory human anatomy and physiology. I've taught research methods. I currently also teach a class on professional readiness in exercise science. So.
Great. Let's start talking about just the general campus climate. What are you seeing on campuses today? Obviously, that's an area that I'm really interested in. Having been on a college campus for 15 years, 20 years total in higher ed, I saw changes happening on my campus. I'm wondering how you've seen the transformation, and specifically, how have you seen that affect the students?
All right. So it's interesting. So from the time I started my undergraduate career in 1989 up until now, I've basically been on college campuses for over 30 years. I've been a faculty member for 22 years now, if I'm doing the math correctly. Um, and so as an undergraduate, I had no idea what the politics of my faculty members were, right? You just didn't know. There, of course, were some feminists, or there were some people that were very outspoken against racism, but you still didn't know how they voted. And that has changed. That really has changed. I think part of it is just overall society. We've seen a lot more, whether you call them red states and blue states, and I never remember which is red or which is blue, but whether it's Republican majority or Democratic majority, which then comes down to conservative and liberal, that's more known and apparent. And I think part of that really has been a lot of more radical liberal ideology on campus, where it's blatantly obvious that some faculty members are extremely liberal and are really pushing their views in their teaching and in the events they sponsor on campus, which then makes it more difficult for faculty members and for students to be moderate, try and be in the middle, or try and be non-committal about their political leanings. One of the things that I think is very fascinating is students have started actually looking at the voter registration to find the political affiliation of their faculty members and use that to select classes,
Wow.
which I wasn't aware was such a thing. But yes, the students they'll have an app and you can look up the faculty member and it say, are they registered Republican or registered Democrat? And the students will try and choose faculty members based on that,
Wow.
which may or may not be a good thing, right? I mean, if the students are choosing
Right.
faculty members that only think the same way the students do, where are they getting diversity of viewpoint, diversity of opinions? But I
Right.
can
And
see
whether it's on the right side or the left side, if you're conservative or liberal, it doesn't matter.
yeah,
If you're just seeking out people that say the same thing, think the same way, that's not education either. That's not learning.
yeah, exactly, exactly. But kind of in the student's defense and maybe parents' defense, a conservative student is much more challenged on campus than would be somebody who leans more liberal. And I think some of the conservative students are trying to find opportunities where they're not going to be challenged in class because they're getting challenged
Right.
in all the rest of their classes. Well, I shouldn't say all the rest of their classes, but they know that they need to try and find a couple of faculty members that they can feel comfortable with. And in their other
Right.
classes, they just need to sit down, be quiet, get their grade, and don't let their viewpoints be known.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not just in the classroom. It's not just on the academic side. It's the campus culture in general. It's, I came from student affairs, and that became the mission, the sole mission of student affairs at the end of my career was just DEI. And they along the way they dropped the mission of supporting students academically for students academic success to this whole other philosophy, mission, and goal of supporting them as a person who is highly aware and sensitive of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and kind of all the rest of it became secondary or tertiary or didn't even matter anymore.
And it's interesting because by and large, I don't think you'll find people on campus that are opposed to diversity. They're like, yeah, we want to educate
Yeah.
anybody that comes to campus. We want to help them have opportunities. But unfortunately, diversity, equity, and inclusion on campus, the way it's frequently implemented, means they support certain groups and exclude other groups,
Yep.
which that's not the right thing to do. We should support all the students. And if any
Right.
student is experiencing bias, they should be protected against that. But it should be any student, not certain selective students,
Right.
which I think, again, it depends on which campus you're at. Tends to be, again, in the more liberal states, the DEI is much more powerful, but it is filtering into even conservative states and conservative schools in conservative states. The DEI is filtering in. And again, it's no secret that most faculty members are liberal. And
Yep.
so most faculty members support the DEI, which unfortunately, the way it's implemented, excludes a lot of our rural students, our conservative students. They're not the target population for a lot of DEI initiatives.
Right. And uh, my training in I think culture is probably understanding cultures is more important than understanding race, because the color of your skin truly doesn't matter. It depends on where and how you were raised, what you culturally were taught. And so my understanding of culture was that we should all really have a safe space to examine our cultural beliefs and others' cultural beliefs. And to provide that safe space isn't by targeting people and telling them they're wrong and bad. And what that does, it's a process called there's a process called reversal, where people will identify with the other instead of themselves anymore. Well, I'm bad and you're good because that's what people are telling me. So they ought to have this reaction of reversal, or they just retreat and go away and say, I don't even want to hear anything about this anymore. My experience, and through higher ed, I love higher ed. And I was invited to go to two national, it was called a white privilege conference. And I went twice. And it was uncomfortable. It was difficult. I had to experience some hostility. I'm not going to say that, everyone there was hostile to me because, I'm white and blonde, but there was some of that. And I had to sit in rooms. I did it twice for 3 days each time, sitting in rooms with the majority of people who don't look like me. They have not had the same life experience as me. And I learned so much. I would not trade that experience in for anything. I got to hear first person from people what their cultural experience is and linked to racial experiences. So I think there's a way to do it to help people understand. I came away believing that white privilege is something that I've experienced, and it helped me understand the kind of small ways that I've had privilege that I maybe didn't recognize before. I think that's very valuable in who I am. But to be on campus, to feel like you're a minority and they're just, driving it, making, and with the expectation that you're going to feel bad. Let's reverse this so you just feel terrible, is not going to accomplish what they say they want to accomplish.
Well, exactly. Telling somebody they're privileged because things that were completely out of their control. Okay, what are you supposed to do about it? I grew up in a small town in the mountains of Utah. It was everybody was white. Honestly,
Yep.
there was
Yep.
there were no blacks in the community. There was one family of Hispanics, and he was just like everybody else. As far as I could tell, there was no problems or anything
Mhm.
there. But then to tell me that that was a privilege because of the color of my skin, because of where I lived, it's difficult for me to say that
Right.
when everybody had the same color skin,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Um, Now, I do understand that, yeah, there are places where people will have problems because of race. One of my good friends in high school, I went to high school in Salt Lake City. One of my good friends, black kid, the first time he was going to come up to our house, his parents called my parents and were scared to death of their black son coming up to our little white community. Um, because they had experienced problems. Well, we didn't have any problems. My dad was very good about saying, well, if anybody has problems, that's their problem, not my problem. And, your son is safe. So those kinds of things are great. But yeah, to try and make
Mhm.
somebody feel guilty because of the color of their skin. I think one of the best campus experiences I was actually at a workshop for helping students to succeed. And it was the university system wide. So it was all the university campuses in Nebraska. And a black man stood up and he said, hey, look around this room. We are diversity. He said, those of you that live in a small town in western Nebraska, those of you that live in the middle of Omaha, those of you that have different colored skins and different religious beliefs and different marital statuses and different family statuses, that's diversity. And that's awesome because, again, that's
Yeah.
encouraging that we can all learn from one another's experience.
Mhm.
Yep.
That's not saying that anybody's wrong. That's not saying
Yeah.
anybody's right. That's saying we have varied experiences. Some can be good, some can be bad, but it's all good to learn from.
It
Mhm.
is. And, that brings me back to when it does have an unfair impact, when um, rural colleges or universities are recruiting urban students with and attracting them with federal dollars and funding and money, and saying, well, they deserve it because they're underrepresented, they're haven't been privileged, when the rural kids have been getting up at the crack of dawn since they could walk to go out and milk cows, clean the barn. They're out on a tractor at the break of dawn. It that's the part that seems unfair. I think, to your point of saying you can't help what color your skin is where you grow up, but to not allow those rural kids to have the same opportunities for that money, that federal funding, that's not fair. And that's
Yeah.
when it feels horrible.
Yeah, as soon as, well, and that's, I mean, whether you call it racism or whatever, as soon as one group is favored over another group, given advantages that the other group doesn't have,
Mm-hmm.
that brings in problems, right? And we
Yeah.
can't fix the past. I'm sorry, Ibram Kendi X, but future racism is not going to cure past racism. All that's going to do is make racism worse. So,
Right.
Very, very true. That is true. Greg, when did you observe the shift starting to happen on campuses?
it's one of those things. You've heard the boiling frog analogy, right? You put a frog in
Mm-hmm.
a pot of water and turn up the heat, and the frog won't know to jump out until he's boiled to death. It's hard to pin it down and say, when did this happen? In
Mm-hmm.
all honesty, though, if I look back on it, um, when Obama was elected president, that's when the radical liberals started to become more aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I won't say it was in his first year of his presidency or his second year of presidency, but somewhere along those lines, that is when you started seeing people pushing more for democratic socialism and people starting to push more, to try and correct the past by offering favored status to certain groups moving forward. And so I would say really,
Mm-hmm.
2013, 14, 15, in that range is when I really started noticing and going, holy cow, what has happened to this, moderate, keep your politics out of the classroom type of thing?
Mm-hmm.
And what I observed during that time on my campus was that they were targeting college campuses and students more than I had ever really been aware of before. Obama came to our campus uh, campaigning for himself and also came to our campus campaigning for Hillary Clinton. And I had a very liberal campus, and students were lined up literally around the block trying to get tickets. And there was a big focus and push on getting those students out to vote, convincing them that this was the better way and that they should really kind of leave their old traditional thoughts and ideas because this was the wave of the future, is what I observed on my campus.
Yeah, that would seem very reasonable. It really was. And I mean, to a certain extent, there was almost an unspoken undertone that if you didn't vote for Obama, you were a bad person. And
I
then the same thing
know.
in 2016 is kind of like, what? How dare you not vote for Hillary Clinton? And
I know.
Mm-hmm.
and I think part of this also parallels the rise with social media,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Because honestly, you start seeing people put things on social media that previously you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that carries over because on the university, we'd all friend one another on social media because we want to know what each other's going on. But then somebody would make a comment, yes, I voted today for Trump. And suddenly somebody else jumps on your Facebook feed. How dare you vote for Trump? He's a racist,
Yeah.
horrible, awful person. And you are too for voting for him, which are things you would never say to somebody face to face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think it bled over from the social media onto campus. And you get, again, you get these subtle and maybe not so subtle pressures to conform.
Right.
Yeah. And then
Right.
you have social media who was kind of silencing one side of it. So you were only for a very long time only getting that part of it. So, if you tried to say anything against him, you were either, pushed to the bottom of the feed or completely taken off for a
Mhm.
while. I've had bans. I got a ban where I couldn't get on. I couldn't post. I couldn't message through Messenger for it was funny too, because I lost that ability until the day of voting. So November 7th was when I was able to start posting again. I was like, well, isn't that? And that was when I was running for school board. I was like, well, isn't that convenient? I got kicked off social media until the day of the election.
Yeah,
That's
what a
nice.
coincidence. Yeah.
Right?
Well, I
Go
had
figure.
that same experience that during that time, people were getting very political when prior to that, people were talking about their children and grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here I am on vacation, I'm on a cruise, yay. And then it switched and was getting more and more political. And personally, I really backed away from social media for a long time because that isn't really what I was interested in. And I was immersed in that world all day long at work. And
Yeah.
so when I was on social media, it was just to connect with other people who weren't trying to sway me, persuade me, indoctrinate me. now I'm the one doing it. So I guess it comes full circle.
Well, and social media is not a horrible, awful thing. It's just like any other tool. I get on social media. We had a grandson born right at the beginning of the year, and so we put pictures of our grandson, and people like it and comment, and so you can connect with people that way.
Yeah.
And I honestly notice, when I throw something out there political, it maybe gets a couple of likes or whatever, but the personal stuff people actually connect to. So it is still good, but it's also hard because sometimes you want to jump into those political arguments and you don't want to give up your point and concede that you've said anything, and that's hard to do. That's hard to back off.
It is.
Greg, tell us about your other work that you're doing now, being involved with women's sports, advocate for women's athletics. Share with us what you're doing and what some of those organizations are and their missions and goals.
Okay, so I'll start off kind of a little how I got involved in this. So there's kind of a history. It goes clear back into the late 1990s of the International Olympic Committee stopping to do sex testing to verify that females are in female sports. And then early 2000s, the International Olympic Committee passed a policy that if a male has gender reassignment surgery and is on hormones for 2 years, then he could compete in female sports. But those were really low key and nobody paid much attention to them or anything. In 2010 or 11, the NC2A put out a policy that if a male suppresses testosterone for a year, he can compete in female sports. And the International Olympic Committee followed along, and that was in 2015. And then we started to see male individuals start to compete in female sports. And around 2015, 2016, when the International Olympic Committee put out their policy, I kind of raised my eyebrows and go, well, that's kind of weird. But I thought maybe research would come out showing, oh yeah, if a male suppresses testosterone to a certain amount for a certain amount of time, it erases all the well-known male athletic advantages. And that research wasn't coming out. And then I thought, well, also maybe one of the prominent female sports scientists or athletes will start speaking out and saying this is wrong, women should not be competing against males. But again, I wasn't sure what to do, and I was kind of keeping my head low. I didn't want to be the squeaky wheel that got greased or something. And then in 2019, Cece Telfer, who previously was Craig Telfer, ran as a male athlete for 3 years at Division II collegiate level, went to the NC2A Division II championships as the female Cece Telfer and won a national championship in the women's 400-meter hurdles. Some of my students who were on the track team were at that event, and they came back to class and like, hey, Dr. Brown, what's going on? How is this person that's been a man his whole life that then identifies as a woman now a female NC2A champion? And I was kind of like, wow, that's really not right. And I dug into the research a little more, and there wasn't research supporting it. And not too long after that, I saw that Selena Soul and the other ladies there in Connecticut were suing the Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference because the CIAC had allowed 2 males to compete in the girls' sports. And these girls that were filing the lawsuit had lost a number of opportunities to win medals or advance and those types of things. And those girls were being represented by Alliance Defending Freedom. And I saw this on the news report, and I thought, well, and sorry, step back just a little bit. A friend at church who I was talking to about this had told me, said, well, you're a professor. If anybody can help out with that, you can. And so then, like I said, not too long after I saw that news report, and so I looked up Alliance Defending Freedom, just Googled them, found their webpage, found a contact us button, clicked that and sent them an email basically saying, well, I'm a professor of exercise science. I know there's a difference between males and females, between men and women and boys and girls, and I know what matters in sports. Can I be helpful? A few weeks later, I received an email back from Alliance Defending Freedom. I'm sure they had Google stalked me and checked me out to make sure that I was legit and to make sure that I wasn't going to be problematic or something. And they contacted me, and we had a Zoom meeting, and we talked about the situation and what the case was. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to help out, which resulted in me writing an expert report for Alliance Defending Freedom on that case for Soul versus CIAC. I'd never written an expert report before. I'd written review papers and scholarly papers. Writing a legal expert report's kind of a different ball of wax. So they were very helpful with that. Which then in 2020, the state of Idaho passed their law stating that you must be female to compete in girls or women's sports, which then a male to female athlete named Lindsay Hecox sued the state of Idaho. And so Idaho contacted me to be an expert witness for that also. So I wrote an expert report there, and that has kind of expanded into, as I said earlier, now I'm involved in some of the cases have been dismissed. Some of them are in appeal, so it's hard to say whether it's 6 cases or 8 cases or whatever that I've written expert reports for, which says the things we all know, right? That there's males and there's females. There's nothing in between. There's not a third sex or fifth sex or anything like that. You have males and females. Males have inherent biologically based athletic advantages. They have more muscle mass, higher bone mineral density, greater cardiorespiratory function. That they're faster, they're stronger, and that being transgender, with or without medical intervention, doesn't erase the male advantages. So those are the main points that I've made. And so I've done a lot of work with Alliance Defending Freedom, which has led me then to working with states like West Virginia and Florida and Tennessee and Arizona, Utah, Idaho. Actually, one interesting case from back east in New England where a boy wanted to play on the girls' volleyball team. Not because he was transgender, just because he was a smaller boy who was more comfortable playing with the girls. But the league policy said, no, you have to be female to be in the female sports. And so I was involved with that a little bit. Another group I've worked with is the ICONS, Independent Council on Women's Sports. That group started up just about 3 years ago. And their whole thing, they're advocating to save women's sports, that there should not be male bodies in women's sports. And they've had 2 conferences. They had one this last summer and had one the summer before that. You can actually look up their website, and they've got videos of the conferences, and it's just great information there. They've got former Olympic athletes that are part of their organization. Riley Gaines has gone and spoken with them, of course. But it's really a great grassroots organization advocating to keep male bodies out of women's sports.
That's wonderful.
Well, the question I hear from time to time that I wonder, the obvious question is, have people gone crazy? Is everybody nuts? Have you lost your mind? Okay, but not that question. The other question is, if trans women, because there aren't trans women want to compete with other women. What you're saying is biologically they are different, maybe altered, but they still have male physiology. They have the male advantage. Why don't they create their own division of trans women, trans men? And the second part that goes along with that is that trans men, so men who used to be women, don't want to compete with guys. Now, isn't that just the fundamental evidence that this is all a bunch of hooey? That if they truly turned into something else and biology didn't matter, then these trans men would certainly want to compete against men, wouldn't they?
So it's so interesting looking at that. And so again, the definitions on this get so confusing sometimes and they change. So a trans woman is someone who is male who identifies as a girl or a woman. And a trans man is someone who's female who identifies as a boy or a man. And so kind of some interesting things there. So World Aquatics has instituted a policy saying if you have experienced male puberty, you cannot compete in the female sporting category. But they had an event in Berlin where they offered a third category. They had the men's category, they had the women's category, and they had an open category. And the open was for anybody. So it could be a trans man, could be a trans woman, could just be anybody signing up. Nobody signed up. Leah Thomas didn't compete in the open category. Nobody else wanted to compete in the open category because part of it is pushing this ideology that trans women are women, which is not true. Woman is adult human female. Girl is juvenile human female. And, surgery, testosterone suppression, all that other stuff, that doesn't change. That doesn't alter your sex. Sex is in every cell of your body. and those things don't change it. And then evidence for like the trans men not competing. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a case in Texas with a girl who identified as male, but the state law in Texas was you have to wrestle in the sex of your birth. But this girl was taking steroids to transition to be more masculine, right? And so, of course, this girl wrestling other girls was kicking butt and taking names because she was using steroids. But then this individual moved on to wrestle at the collegiate level against males and just got stomped everywhere. Also, if you look back, so when Leah Thomas was in the news so much and doing so well, there was a trans man swimming in those events. Isaac Hennig was the name of a female who identified as male. And you'll see some of the events where there's women swimming, and there's a women swimmer wearing a man's swimming suit with scars on the chest from radical mastectomy, and did okay as a male, female who identifies as a man competing against other females. The next year, I think it's this most recent year, honestly, Isaac Hennig, swimming on male's team, has won has won absolutely nothing, and has beaten one other athlete, and that was an athlete with one arm.
Oh no.
So, and again, that's the example. That's why this biology matters, and you can't just give some hormones and expect that you're going to change it.
Right. And I have known on campus both colleagues and students who had transitioned. And in my personal life, I have 2 people that I personally know who have transitioned. And as adults in their personal life, I have all the respect in the world for them as people. They've all been wonderful, fine people. I enjoy them. I've enjoyed my relationships with them. But there does need to be some kind of, boundary of where this is my personal life, but this is where it impacts somebody else. And I think athletics is one of those spaces that you're talking about, that this is going to impact other people's career. It's going to, affect other people's achievements. And that's where it imposes their choices onto someone else. And that part is not fair.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a website called shewon.org, so SHEWON.org, where they track all these instances where male athletes have displaced women and girls from sports because they're competing in the women's sports category. If you look at the information Alliance Defending Freedom has put out, they've got information where they're showing that 2 male athletes over the course of 3 years won 15 championships and set a certain number of records and displaced 85 girls from moving on in competition. And so it has this magnifying effect. And again, there's only a certain number of varsity spots on a team. So if you put a male in there, that means there's a female that doesn't have that varsity spot. And that then bubbles down. So now this girl who would make varsity is now running JV, which then pushes another girl further down the JV roster. And then if you take it to competition, all right, so if this male athlete gets a gold medal, that means a girl got a silver who should have gotten a gold. That means a girl got a bronze who should have gotten a silver. And that means a girl who got no medal should have gotten a bronze medal. In cases like in swimming and track and field, where you have your qualifying heats and your final heat, well, that means you have at least one girl who didn't advance to the next heat that should have. You have a female that doesn't get the title of All-American because she should have. She may have been 8th place, but she still would be an All-American. And so it displaces all these different things. And I completely agree with you. If an adult wants to transition, if they and their healthcare providers decide that is what is best for their mental health and their well-being, dress how you like, change your name as you like, but there are places where it matters. It matters in sports. It matters in healthcare. If you go to your doctor's office and you're having abdominal pain, they need to know if you're male or female, because if you're male, that eliminates a whole lot of possibilities.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's a complex issue, and I don't think that there are really easy answers, but I think these easy answers in the whole thing is how it impacts other people. I'm old enough that I remember when um, Title IX just was passed. That was when I was in high school, junior high and high school. And they were, starting all these sports teams for girls because they were taking money away from what had been budgeted for men's sports. And, all of a sudden, my little school, I was a little rural high school, all of a sudden they had money for a gymnastics team and they could buy mats for girls to do gymnastics. And all of a sudden there was a volleyball team. All of a sudden, and I I wasn't an athlete in high school, so I wasn't personally impacted by any of this. But the girls were really excited that they had something that they could do. The women athletes were thrilled that they had these opportunities all of a sudden that they hadn't previously had. And so coming from that context that many years, decades ago to where we are now, it just baffles me that these women my age who did benefit by Title IX were given the opportunity to compete and to grow as people and athletes aren't speaking up. Why aren't you having a fit, girls?
Yeah, it amazes me. And, there are some that are speaking up. There really are, but not as many as you would think.
Right.
Again, you would think that these women who can look back and say, wow, pre-Title IX, 4% of girls participated in sports in high school. Now it's
Mhm.
like 45% or something of girls participate in sports in high school. And so
Right.
you would think women that could look back on the 1970s and say, hey, I was able to go to college because I had a college scholarship that wouldn't have been available to me before
Yeah.
1972. And then
Yeah.
they say, and now we're going to say that college scholarship to go to somebody who's male, even though he identifies as a woman, he's still male and has male advantage. And you're surprised. I'm just surprised that more of them aren't stepping up in the legislature, that aren't stepping up in journals and stuff like that, and saying this is wrong. But I think this kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier about this idea of the pile on that you get on social media, and just
Mhm.
the fear of being labeled as speaking incorrectly. The
Mhm.
cancel culture, and cancel culture is absolutely real.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes. And that, yeah, that we can't have just conversations about some of these topics that are respectful, because truly I do want to understand. So any of the listeners out there, if you want to, comment or write to us, please do. We have our Facebook page, Conservative Voices Silenced. We have our email comments. I always have to think of this. Comments at
It's a long.
conservativevoicessilence.com. And on Rumble, you can write comments, any of those, because I really do. I sincerely want to understand.
Yeah, and like you said, yeah, I cannot imagine how difficult it would be truly thinking that your life would be better if you were in a different sexed body.
Hmm.
That's got to be just a phenomenal challenge. Just very difficult. And I do know people that have transitioned, and they
Hmm.
seem happier because of it, and so good for them. But again,
Yep.
they also, the ones that I know, also recognize that yeah, it does matter in sports, and it does matter in healthcare, and there are some
Hmm.
places where it does matter, and they want to be respectful of those. So, like a lot of things, I think it is a few very radical individuals that have hijacked things to take it away from more reasonable, moderate type people.
Hmm. I do too. Um, Greg, before we go, can you help us out with some of the resources that you're connected with? So, if some of our listeners want to do their own research or get involved, where can they go?
All right. So if you want to know about the various legal cases, Alliance Defending Freedom has a great website. I think it's adflegal.org. And they've got all sorts of things that they're representing on there, whether it is educators who are facing backlash because they are recognizing biology and not wanting to use chosen pronouns or something like that. You can read up on the case for Selena Soul. You can read up on the case in West Virginia, where they're standing up to protect women's sports. And then there's the Icons website. Let me see if I can pull that up here so I can give a
Great.
better idea what the website is.
And while you're looking, I am just going to acknowledge that we lost Elizabeth on camera before we got on this morning. She said that there's a horrible storm going on in Pennsylvania where she is, and high winds. So something maybe she blew away. I hope not, Elizabeth. But okay, what'd you find, Greg?
All right, and so this other one, it's Icons Women, so ICONSWOMEN.com, right? And it's the Independent Council on Women's Sports. So if you Googled Independent Council on Women's Sports, that should take you there. And again, they've got videos from their conferences where they have all sorts of people speaking out. On either, there's Riley Gaines speaking of her experience. There's several other female athletes speaking of their experience competing against male athletes. People speaking of their experiences pre-Title IX, post-Title IX. Legal experts that have spoken on what are the human rights implications as far as women's sports. You've got scientists speaking about the differences between males and females. So that's a great resource to look at for lots of information on that. There's a United Kingdom organization called Fair Play for Women. And they've actually put out a really great recent report where they're documenting, I think it's 50 women who have stopped competing, women and girls, girls as young as 12 years old, that have stopped competing because of the presence of males in their sports.
Okay.
And that's Fair Play for Women. And again, that's in the United Kingdom, which they have a lot of organization there. But Fair Play for Women has a lot of links to the published research and those types of things. So those are some really good organizations that you can look at for more information on this.
Okay, great. And also, rolling back to higher education and campuses and what's going on there, if there are faculty, staff, people affiliated with campus that are looking for some allies that are conservative or traditional, do you have resources for them? Organizations, associations,
Yeah. So let
publications?
me look up this other one. So there's the National Association of Scholars, and that is an organization. I don't necessarily want to say that they are conservative, but they're certainly not liberal. And they have a lot of information and reports that they've done on the problems that DEI is causing at colleges and universities and other issues where politics, and particularly liberal-leaning politics, is disrupting good functioning on campus organizations. There's the Academic Freedom Alliance, which a concern on college campuses, right? We have our academic freedom to teach in our classroom what needs to be taught, to do our research that needs to be done. And unfortunately, a lot of times DEI is being used as a way to silence academic freedom, to impose on faculty members that you must teach certain things and not teach other things. That is being used. And so the Academic Freedom Alliance really pushes, they have some good information on that. There's also the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, FAIR, and they are actually representing faculty members in lawsuits where they have been silenced for speaking unpopular opinions. And they work a lot with legislative bodies to try and make sure that we're against intolerance and racism of any form. And I shouldn't say we, I'm not part of FAIR. Well, I took the FAIR pledge. So, and then there's also the FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. That's another organization. And so those organizations all have campus arms or are geared for higher education to help people find allies, to help people find resources. Sometimes it's just a nice place to read something and find out you're not the only one who has conservative opinions on a university campus.
And doesn't FIRE provide connections to attorneys and legal advice? Is that FIRE?
Yeah, FIRE and FAIR both they have attorneys and can provide legal advice to help out. And you know what? So does Alliance Defending Freedom. Alliance Defending Freedom also has an educational freedom, educational rights arm. And so any of those are good organizations to contact to find out to voice your concerns type of thing. And my experience with them is they've been really good. I, send them something and said, "What? This doesn't seem right to me," and they give good advice on, well,
Hmm.
that's probably not something that you should be promoting in your classroom. But here's concerns if you try and fight back on it. Do you really want to wade into this battle,
Perfect.
both as far as time, money, consequences, as far as being able to get along with your colleagues on campus? So they're really good about that. And what I've seen, if it's really something worth fighting, they'll tell you that. They'll say this is something you really should stand up for, or they'll
Mm.
say, you know what, this is a small fish. Don't try and fry it. Wait till we get the keeper.
Yep. Great. And, I'm going to plug my book, Student Voices Silenced. It's written for parents primarily. So parents can see through the eyes of students, faculty, and staff the reality of what it's like on campus right now. And it's worse than you think. So read the book. There's also another book by Stanley Ridgely called Brutal Minds. And he's a professor. So it's written from the academic point of view. And it's a pretty, scholarly work. Mine is an easy read, very conversational. Stanley's book is one that has so much information in it that it, in my experience, just takes a while to get through because it's so well done. It's just so well written. Um, so those are a couple of other resources that I recommend too for people.
Another one I'd like to point out is Turning Point USA.
Yes.
Um, Turning Point
Yes.
USA, it's become a very large conservative organization on both high school and college campuses.
Yep.
And again, the great thing about Turning Point USA is geared for students, and it's a
Yep.
great place for the students to come together and find other people that have the same political identity, feelings, however you want to point it. So again, there's strength in numbers a lot of times to find out that you're not the only conservative student on your campus. And
Hmm.
Turning Point USA, they actually have a lot of really good resources. I'm not sure how they get their funding, but they have these meetings that a lot of times they can get students a decent amount of money to get to the meeting, to
Yeah.
be there at the conservative summit with other students, to hear and talk about what's going on at various campuses, opportunities to hear from some of the great speakers, whether it's
Mhm.
Benjamin Shapiro or Michael Nolas or various
Yeah.
conservative senators,
Yep.
governors, things like that. So it's a great organization. And so if a parent is concerned about their son or daughter going to university, college, or even high school, they can look and see if there's a Turning Point USA chapter. And if not, they can probably start one.
Yep. That's a great point, Greg. And that's something that I advise parents to do is to help your student find those organizations. That is such a great support system because it's they're connecting with other peers, maybe on their campus, maybe across the country, but that's how they start building their support and their network. I have recently launched a mobile app called Rise Conservative Students, and it is just for conservative and traditional students. It has video lessons for students on communication, resilience, emotional intelligence, just how do you manage your emotions when you're in these situations that are adversarial. But the beautiful thing about it is that it does have a community feature in it also, so they can connect with other students. And I do think that's the key, so they don't feel alone.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because they may be in a certain class where they are the only student that isn't jumping onto the bandwagon, but they need that strength and support to know, no, stand true to what you believe in. You don't
Hmm.
have to jump on the bandwagon in the class debate. Maybe you just sit there and maybe you need to be quiet because it may
Yep.
not be worth the only 1 out of 23 students to voice something oppositional. Or
Yes.
maybe it is.
Yes. 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 And in my app, I have these lessons, video lessons that talk through that with students so they can start to develop the skills to be discerning about, is this a situation that I want to put myself out there, Or is this one that I can just walk away from and say, nah, this really isn't probably going to get me the outcome that I want. And so is it really worth my investment doing this? So
Yep.
that's a life skill that we
It
all
is.
have
It
to
is.
learn.
Yep. I mean, even with when you get married, right? You've got to decide, is that
Yeah.
something worth bringing up, or you just let it go?
That's probably one of the most important things that we we will learn in a relationship. Absolutely. Well, Greg, this has been fantastic. Anything else that you want to leave us with before we close?
You know, I do think it's important that we remember that there is value in education.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of people questioning the value of higher education. It is expensive, um, but
Yep.
there are some things that the only way you're going to be a dentist, a medical doctor, a physical
Yep.
therapist, an accountant, you need to go to college or university.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily for everyone. You don't need a university degree to be a plumber or electrician, and you make lots of more money than that than doing those things.
Hmm.
But don't just take higher education off the shelf because you're concerned about the radical liberalism of higher education. You can
Yes.
fortify yourself, you can find allies, and be successful to reach the career that you want that requires that higher education.
I'm 100% on board. I love higher education. I respect it. I I advocate for it, and you're right. If families and students figure out why they're going and they're clear about what that means to them, financially, for their future, professionally, if that's the answer, there are ways to go and you can be super successful and to be even more successful in your life and in your community after college. So I agree. I don't want people to think of higher education as a hard stop, and it's not. It There are resources out there, and you can get through it. So yay, higher ed. All right, Greg, thank you so much. It was great having you here, and you are doing phenomenal work. I just respect and admire you so much, and all the things you're doing. In 10 years, I know it's going to make a difference. It's going to be really significant. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Christine. Thanks for saying that. I'm hopeful. I'm with you. I hope that in 10 years, we'll see things returned to a more reasonable, common sense place.
Right, right. That's great. All right. Thanks, Greg, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
I am doing this closing real quick because after me getting booted earlier, now Christine has vanished. So we are so grateful for every single one of you who listens, who watches. We're on Rumble, Spotify. If there is somewhere that you listen to or you watch that you do not see us yet, please let us know. You can email us at comments@conservativevoicessilenced.com. You can also let us know if you have a story and would like to be on our show, or if you know someone else who has a story and would like to be on the show. We are always looking for new faces to put on here, and we always love to bring back those we've had on before, like Adam B. Coleman. He's been on here twice, and I'm sure once he's getting into the stuff that he's been doing lately that we'll get a little recap from him as well at some point. So, and if you've seen anybody on the show and you'd like us to bring them back, please let us know. We love to bring them back. So I guess I've got nothing else to say, y'all. Again, we absolutely love every single one of you. Keep watching, keep listening, send us your comments, comment on Rumble. Oh, we are now on YouTube. Not every episode. It's taking a while to get them all on there, but I believe as of right now, there are 4 episodes on there. So that way you have another place to watch us, not just Rumble. And also, let us know what you think. Let us know if there's anybody you'd like to see on our show. And I hope you all have a fantastic week.